Hello, History 1 students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and we are going to start notes for Chapter 14, Imperialism. And last year, as in our world history class, we talked a little bit about European imperialism, but the truth is, the United States was also an imperialistic nation. We've kind of mentioned a little bit in passing about this thing called manifest destiny. This belief that uh, the Americas, or at least the lower 48 United States, that we should have, as a people, pretty much settlement from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast of what is now kind of the United States. And that was kind of a big dream. But by 1890, we pretty much had achieved that. And so there was a desire to start looking elsewhere. And if you take a look at this map, you might see that the United States had its hands on some different territories. Some things here that might look familiar, like Alaska and Hawaii, but there is a handful of different territories, some of which are no longer part of our protectorate, if you want to call it that, of the United States. But at some point in time, there are some territories that are still in the hands of our nation. So we're going to talk about the rise of that. And so, section one is the imperialist vision. And to look at that imperialist vision, you got to talk about this guy, George Washington. When Washington left office, he gave a farewell address. And some historians believe that perhaps Washington didn't pen this, that maybe a guy like Alexander Hamilton, who was a close friend of Washington and a member of his cabinet, might have actually wrote this up. But within that address, he forewarns the United States to be aware of what was going on elsewhere in the world. This is the kind of the time of the rise of guys like Napoleon Bonaparte, and I think Washington was kind of fearful of the United States getting involved in alliances. And within this little address, he mentions something to the fact of entangling alliances with none. In other words, kind of be independent, don't get tied up into foreign nations' businesses. And for the most part, just kind of mind your own business. But the truth is, as we kind of move, closer to the beginning of the 20th century, we're really kind of entangled in a lot of business elsewhere in the world. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the American causes of imperialism. And you're going to need to jot these 3 points down. The only items that you need to write down are kind of the bolder headings. The sub points, you don't need to write those down. But there are basically 3 causes. And the first one is this belief in the superiority of the American culture. There was a fellow named John Fiske who coined this idea of Anglo Saxism, which is basically his argument that he believed that English speaking nations had a superior character, superior ideas, and a superior form of government. And in the United States, this is kind of linked to the idea of manifest destiny. I'm sure the Europeans, particularly the British, they were kind of tying this into some of their own ideals about imperialism. But there were many people that kind of bought into this, and at the same time, they kind of twisted it in the sense to kind of give it some other meanings as well. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. The second point is that we had a belief that the nation needed a large navy for our security, with bases that were going to be overseas so that our naval power would be able to go wherever it needed to be. And a guy named Captain Alfred Mahan published a book around 1890 called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History from 1660 to 1783, which probably focused a lot more on other European powers such as the Dutch and the British, the Spaniards. But for the most part, there were some people here in the United States that were kind of buying into that idea as well. a few of our future presidents, that is, too. And then the third point, the belief that the economy needed overseas markets. And some of this was because of the Industrial Revolution. America, for the most part, was really productive. We made a lot of goods, but we needed a place to sell them. And Americans here could only buy so much. So we needed to look elsewhere for people who would be willing to buy our products. So let's take a look at some of our questions here. And number one, why did Americans show little interest in expanding the nation's territory and increasing international influence in the years immediately following the Civil War? For the most part, like the Reconstruction era. And some of that has to do with the fact that, we were reconstructing. We were trying to rebuild the South. We were building up our industries. We were settling the West. For the most part, we were trying to get moving. And at some point in time, we've accomplished these things. And maybe that's when we start focusing our desires elsewhere. What is imperialism? Imperialism is an economic and political domination of a strong nation over a weaker area or a weaker nation. Um, if you think about British imperialism, the fact that they had lots of holdings so that they could improve their markets, uh, the United States was kind of wanting to do something very similar. Number three, what part did tariffs play in European expansion in the late 1800s? And tariffs are taxes that you put on goods that are coming from other countries. And for the most part, these tariffs reduced trade between industrial countries, forcing companies, okay, and countries to look for other markets overseas. So if Americans can only buy X number of steel rails that you use for railroads, we might want to start looking elsewhere to an area that might be in the process of building railroads. So maybe we'll start looking at Japan or maybe start looking at China. Um, Perhaps those people would want to buy some of our products. And number four, what did rulers of a protectorate have to do in exchange for protection from rebellions and invasions? Okay, a protectorate typically is like a big brother, a really well established country that, for the most part, is kind of keeping a watchful eye on a weaker or smaller nation in exchange for some different things. And for the most part, if you were a country that was being protected, you would have to accept advice from those people who were your protectors. So in this case, it might have been from Europeans, and they might basically say, "Hey, if we're going to help you economically, we would like you to change your form of government, and or perhaps maybe establish a certain language to be the language of the land, or to allow us to come in and establish." Um, and some kind of exclusive trade rights. All of that would be in exchange for security. And number five, how did supporters of social Darwinism justify the idea of expanding American powers overseas? And many of these social Darwinists, they argued that nations competed with each other and that only the strongest would survive. And in a way, it's kind of like business competition, if you think about it. If you are a company that is willing to make deals and kind of pay attention to the needs and the wants of the consumers, you're probably going to continue to do business. The same kind of goes for this idea of expanding our influence into other territories. Um, if you're willing to get in there and to start um, dominating, you're probably going to be able to continue to dominate. Number six, how did Anglo-Saxonism fit with the idea of manifest destiny? And we mentioned before, Anglo-Saxonism is this belief that English-speaking nations are dominant. And many Americans believe that this was kind of justified because it had been the nation's destiny to expand west. It was not right to go. It was not right to go overseas, but at some point in time, we're going to have that desire to do so. Number 7, how did Minister Josiah Strong convince many Americans to support imperialism? You see him pictured below. Josiah Strong was probably one of the more popular pastors of his era of time, kind of leading into the beginning of the 20th century. And what he did is he linked Christianity and this whole concept of missionary work, this idea of going out evangelizing and converting um, foreign peoples, to the concept of Anglo-Saxonism. So if you were going to convert people of China, you would not only convert them to Christianity, but you would also teach them English, and you would teach them the American culture and the American way of life, to show them and to have them kind of adapt towards kind of the Anglo-Saxon way. And number 8, what did Alfred T. Mahan suggest the United States do to defend its right to trade? And his belief was build a large navy. We mentioned before that he had written a book about this desire to have a stronger navy. He had been a professor, I believe, at the Naval College at Annapolis. And for the most part, he had a lot of people who were listening to him, including guys like Theodore Roosevelt, who was just smitten with the fella. And number 9, why did Japan's rulers not want to trade with the United States or other Western countries? This all goes back to kind of some things that we talked about in world history. But the Japanese, for the most part, pretty much had isolated themselves coming out of the 1500s into the 16th and 17th centuries. And in 1858, Commodore Perry shows up in Edo Bay, which is basically Tokyo Harbor. And for the most part, the Japanese rulers believed that excessive contact with the West would destroy their culture, their Japanese culture. Matthew Perry and his ships, for the most part, convinced the Japanese maybe to think else otherwise, I guess. And number 10, how did Japan respond to the forced trade with the United States? And Japanese leaders, for the most part, began to modernize their country, and they adapted Western technology and industrialization. So really from 1858 to really the beginning of kind of 1900, the Japanese basically went from like the Middle Ages with the whole idea of samurai and shoguns to becoming as industrialized and westernized as pretty much most of the world. In number 11, what did Hawaiian sugarcane planters hope would happen after they overthrew the monarchy and set up their own government? Kind of have to talk a little bit about what was going on in Hawaii to kind of set this up. The Hawaiian Islands for years had been kind of a stopping point for a lot of European traders. Part of it has to do with the locality. It's about halfway across the Pacific, so it was kind of a wonderful refueling station. And European explorers going back to Captain Cook all had kind of ties back to this set of islands. Hawaii had its own monarchy. Probably the most famous of the monarchs that came out of Hawaii was King Kamehameha. If you ever go to Hawaii, he is pictured on a lot of statues around the state. Matter of fact, if you go to the state capitol in Honolulu, there is a huge gold statue of the man. As a matter of fact, if you go to the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., there is also a statue of King Kamehameha. But probably better known as the last monarch of Hawaii, is this woman that you see pictured at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, Queen Liliuokalani. She happened to, kind of be kind of in the, I guess you could say maybe the wrong place at the wrong time. She had taken over for some of the male heirs when her time came. She had been educated outside of Hawaii. Matter of fact, she spent some of her years um, as she was learning, as formative education, I guess you could say, in the United States. And so, kind of towards the latter half of the 19th century, we had a lot of companies, produce companies, that were coming into Hawaii to establish plantations. Sugar cane had been planted there, pineapple. You probably are familiar with the Dole brand of pineapples, but the Dole family had a huge plantation, and they still do to this day on the Hawaiian island of Oahu, which is where Honolulu is located. So, what did the sugar cane planters hope would happen after they overthrew Queen Liliuokalani? For the most part, the planters wanted the United States to annex Hawaii, and that didn't quite happen immediately. They had actually petitioned President Grover Cleveland, and I think he was really upset by the fact that these planners, for the most part, had kind of staged this little rebellion, and they placed Queen Liliuokalani in house arrest. Matter of fact, if you've ever heard the Hawaiian song "Aloha Oi," that was a song that she wrote when she was under house arrest. And truth is, it's a kind of a sad song. But if you go to Hawaii today, you'll hear that song everywhere you go. As soon as you get off, you're at a airport, you hear it kind of pumping through the speaker systems. If you arrive by ship, you'll hear it there at the docks. It's everywhere. But it's the song that she wrote, and it's a song that she wrote when she was arrested as a result of this, this little coup d'etat. Eventually, as we get closer to 1898, 1899, Hawaii will be annexed by the United States. But by that time, William McKinley is going to be our president. In number 12, where did Latin America buy most of its manufactured goods in the 1800s? And that was from Europe. Part of that was because of the fact that, Europe, for the most part, had kind of dominated when we talk about manufacturing. But there was a lot of hope that, that maybe Latin Americans would buy their goods from the United States. And so for the US to kind of get involved in that part of the world, it just seemed kind of ideal. So in number 13, what was the purpose of a custom union? And what this union would do is it would require all of the American nations to reduce their tariffs against each other and to treat each other equally in trade. It's kind of like the best way to explain a customs union. It's kind of like the precursor of what we call the free trade zones or free trade agreements. It was to allow to have trade kind of open up between these nations and to do so at a very reasonable amount of money. Thank you very much.